Around 7 months ago, I recalled this random memory from my childhood where I was sitting in the front yard with my grandma in the evening and there were these beautiful fireflies just roaming around. It was very peaceful and silent, but at the same time, it felt radiant and joyful. Being a 3D artist, I always get inspired by moments in the lives of other people or even mine in this case. So I decided to turn this childhood memory into a 3D animation to share it with others who might have also experienced something like this at some point. In this video, I'll be breaking down my whole thought process behind the scenes of bringing this project to life and also share some tips and techniques along the way for some of you guys who might want to hear the technicalities of it. So let's get into step 1. Music. What I've noticed with how I work is that I always like to start by making the music for the animation because it guides me to tell the story better. I tried to capture that feeling I got from that memory by creating a melody first, which sounded something like this. I experimented with a lot of other sounds and instruments and finally came up with this finished track as a result. Here's what it sounds like. Step 2. Concept art. Several months passed and I was too busy to work on this project, so I kept it aside before finally pulling myself together and working on the concept art for it. I wanted to have the main character be a child too, since that would be more relatable to people given the fact that we rarely get to see fireflies nowadays. I wasn't sure if it would be a boy or a girl, so I just drew a blob for now. So anyway, I started working on the simple storyboard, just a big image with little boxes for each shot that I had in mind in order. Since nobody else is going to be involved in this project, I didn't bother making it perfect or anything, just good enough so that I can take a look at it later and recall the shots that I was imagining. The idea that I wanted to animate wasn't exactly me sitting with my grandma in the evening, but more of a generalized version of the feeling I got from it, so that it doesn't get too specific and personal. So the scene was going to be a grassland or like a forest clearing where our main character will be lying on the grass taking a nap. The first scene will be a medium shot of the character. When the firefly comes into the frame, it'll switch to a bit of a close-up shot of the character gently catching the firefly. The next shot will be a wider shot which will show more of the fireflies flying around, which will tell the viewers that the character is sitting in a place where there are multiple fireflies. After that, I thought of adding a close-up of the firefly resting on a blade of grass to suggest that it is also an important subject in the story other than the human character. And then finally, we ended with a super wide shot of the whole environment with the forest in the background and all of the fireflies fluttering around to really ground everything that we have been hinting at so far. I finished the concept art a couple of months ago and posted it on my Instagram as a work in progress image, so if you want to see the behind the scenes of my upcoming projects, make sure to follow me there. After spending some decent time working on other videos and procrastinating from working on this project, I finally told myself to either suck it up and start working on this project or just keep staying depressed and disappointed in myself at my below average skills. Astonishingly, I decided to go with the former. So I started collecting more references on fireflies and organized them in a neat program called PureRef. Since I had an idea about the environment, I mainly needed references for lighting and atmosphere that I was going to recreate. So my references were sparse at the moment, mostly consisting of cool Pinterest images and anime screenshots. Step 3. The character. I felt like starting from the character would be a good idea since it'll be in the animation like 90% of the time, and we can also use it to get a sense of scale early on while working on the scene afterwards. I'm using an add-on called Human Generator for this project, which is my favorite add-on to generate characters at the moment. I'll leave a link to it in the description if you want to check it out. I decided that I wanted to create a girl who's around 12 years old, but I guess I don't know what 12-year-old girls look like because I ended up with a character that looks exactly like my best friend, who is a guy, by the way. But I didn't bother with it too much because it just needed to look cute and expressive, so I just gave her some basic clothing and called it done. For now at least. Step 4. The environment. Now this probably sounds like the most complicated part of the process, but actually isn't in this case. First and foremost, I added a cube and scaled it to roughly match the character's proportions so that I can use it to get a sense of how big my ground plane should be. Naturally, I added the ground plane next, sculpted some bumps on it, and started working on the forest. For all of the trees and vegetation in the scene, I'm using an add-on called Botanic because I have this very rare disability of not wanting to make lower quality versions of models I already have access to. But really, this and the human generated animator add-on were lifesavers for this project because now I had one less thing to worry about, and that is high quality models. So I used Botanic in conjunction with a free add-on called Clicker, which lets you select a model and a ground and instance the model wherever you click on the ground. Extremely handy. I'll have links to all of these add-ons in the description. After some fiddling around, I made this simple forest for now. Why I'm saying for now is because this in no way is optimized for rendering right away, so we will have to clean it up a lot later. But I like to not worry about all of the technical stuff in the beginning and just let myself loose so that I can try out a bunch of stuff rapidly. Step 5. Posing the character. Now that we have a base for the environment, I decided to go ahead and animate the character because it's so easy. It's so easy. After a couple of painstaking moments of learning how the rig worked, I finally got into working on the character pose for the first shot. For any of my non-technical or beginner viewers, the most common way to pose and animate 3D characters is by using a rig, which you can think of as a skeletal system for our character. So it's basically a bunch of bones connected with the mesh. Then we can move and rotate these individual bones to get the pose that we want. We can then create some main poses and add them as keyframes and then transition between these poses based on how far each keyframe is from one another on the timeline. Hope that made sense. Now you can enjoy the rest of the video. I have to mention that I work in a very chaotic manner, so turning all of my recordings into these steps is not an easy task. So sometimes I might just put in random segments like experimenting with the lighting a bit or just adding this monstrosity in the name of a firefly. But yeah, I got this model for free off of the internet, and I simply added some shape keys for some poses which I might want to use for animating it later. In the final animation, the firefly's body won't be visible anyway, except for the close-up shot where a firefly would come and sit on a grass blade. Setting up shape keys is quick and fun, so it really can't be considered as wasted time. Step 6. Animating the fireflies. After scaling the firefly down to a realistic size, I added a curve and edited it to make the path that the firefly is going to follow in the shot. Then using a curve modifier and animating the firefly moving in the direction of the curve, that is the x-axis, gives us something like this. To make this not look so robotic, I added keyframes in between these two to randomize the timing a bit, and also used the noise modifier in the graph editor for the y-axis to add some more randomness, and this is how it turned out. Now instead of animating the same firefly for the next shot, I duplicated it so that I had a fresh palette, and then I just animated the visibility to make it appear only when it switches to the next camera. This workflow will help me get more control over the movements of the fireflies in each shot as they are independent objects. Before animating the next firefly, I decided to animate the character further so that it looks like she woke up from the firefly's glow. I also animated a little smile and her hand so that it looks like she's about to catch the firefly. I know it looks very creepy at the moment, but we have plenty of opportunities to refine it later. Now finally, I animated the firefly directly without using any curves, so it was just about adding location and rotation keyframes wherever I needed to, focusing on following the movement of the hand and keeping the firefly between the palms. Next, I added these two fireflies on either side of the screen just as a stylistic preference and also to help with the composition. Step 7. Miscellaneous stuff, plus more firefly animations. I forgot to mention this, but all this time I was working on the shots one by one, so I was adding the cameras according to the music and what I had in my mind about the camera angles from the concept art. So each time I wanted to change the camera, I'd add a marker in the timeline and bind the camera that I wanted to switch to that marker. Anyway, now it was time to animate the character for the rest of the shots. I just recorded myself to use as reference for some shots and then animate the character accordingly. For this shot of the firefly close-up, it was the same as animating the other fireflies, except I was already using this built-in function modifier set to sign after adding a start and an end keyframe for the wings shape keys to make them flutter. So what I did to slow down the wings to a stop in the shot was to just restrict the frame range end and give it a little bit of a blend out. Next, I decided to get into a little bit of optimization, so that just meant cleaning up the scene a little bit, removing the trees, bushes and grass that were out of the camera view. This will make previewing and rendering a lot faster. Right around this time, CG Matter decided to drop this awesome video on how to make fireflies using geonodes, so I watched it right away and got this result, which I brought into my scene. With a little bit of tweaking, I was able to make it work, and that saved me the pain that particle systems were giving me because I could never get them to look just right because of my lack of brain cells. Step 8. Lighting. This is the part that usually makes or breaks a render. You could have the highest quality stuff with the most details, but if your lighting isn't good enough, this is what it'll turn out to be like. I learned a lot from my animation for the alternate realities challenge, and this time I was ready to put in some work into perfecting that nighttime look. I started off by using a single area light and played around with it first. I also felt like the colors of the characters' clothes were a bit too bland, so I changed them to these to complement the cold look of the rest of the scene, but still not be too contrasty, if that makes sense. At the end, this is what the lighting setup looked like. It was just two massive area lights, one focusing more on the trees and one tilted a bit towards the character like this. We don't want too many lights for this because it wouldn't make much sense in the scene where the only sensible light source is the moonlight. Besides, we also want to take advantage of the fireflies for that extra bit of lighting. Other than these two major light sources, I also used another area lamp in the foreground with a negative power to create extra shadows at this part just to help with the composition. I'm also using this procedural world material setup for the sky and stars, which also contributes to the ambient lighting. I just couldn't find an HDRI that looks better than making it procedurally, so yeah. Step 9. Rendering. After I was done with the lighting and making multiple minor adjustments to the animations and also the placement of the elements in the scene, adding some depth of field for that nice background blur and also some motion blur, I decided to render out a few test frames for each shot to see if I was heading in the right direction, and also color corrected them a little bit in Photoshop to get a better idea of what the final thing will look like. These helped me point out some minor flaws like how the background fireflies in this shot were too bright, so I went ahead and did the final iteration of this project, just tidied things up, set all the necessary settings such as the resolution and frame rate, and here's a pro tip. Always set the output file format to .tiff or .exr and avoid using .png format if you know you're going to be post-processing your render later, since there is a lot of useful information that gets lost in the compression method that .png uses. After that, what I did was I set the start and end frames for the render to shot 1 first and then rendered the sequence. I did that for each shot until I had the full animation in separate folders. This is just a personal preference to make it more organized for myself. Step 10. Compositing. We're finally at the last step of the process, and this is where we'll be turning the sequence of images into a full video. I'm using After Effects for this part. I started by importing all of the image sequences as footages and then laid them on the timeline. I always like to first start off by doing some basic color correction, which is basically just tweaking the exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, and a little bit of color grading. Then I move on to the curves and honestly just tweak stuff according to what looks good to me. I also added a little bit of vignette to the whole thing to make sure the focus is on the character at all times. Next, I wanted to add some bloom to the fireflies because right now they just look like floating glitchy pixels. So I duplicated the original shot and then added a luma key to mask out the brightest parts of the image, which in this case are the fireflies. Then I put some Gaussian blur on it and also a glow effect, and then set the blending mode to linear light. I also made a secondary bloom effect by using the same technique, but this time it is a little more blurred and the glow has a tint to it. I set this one to linear dodge, and this is pretty much the secret to getting that crispy but soft glow. You just have to combine two kinds of bloom effects. If you render out the emission pass from Blender, you can also just use the glow effect and get great looking results. Now I felt like the last shot needed some fog as well, so I added it using a black solid with an animated fractal noise effect on it, along with some Gaussian blur and a bluish tint. I made two of these, one for the background and one for the foreground. I had rendered out a mist pass for this shot, which I tweaked to have the white part start from behind the character and the rest of the part being black. I used this as a mask for the background fog so that it fits in perfectly. I also added these soft blue glows coming from the left side to make it look like moonlight. I added more stuff like the super huge glow sweeping from the bottom right to the top left of the screen to make it look like a firefly flying very close to the camera. This helped in the transition from this shot to the next, which would have felt very abrupt if it weren't for this. For this close-up shot of the firefly, I added this nice anamorphic lens flare and animated it. I thought it looked pretty cool, but I really shouldn't have gone for the hexagonal shapes for the bokeh because anamorphic lenses in real life do not work like that, which I learned from this lovely YouTube comment on the original animation video. Finally, I made this dust layer using particle systems and used the light in blending mode to overlay it on top of each shot. To wrap things up, I added some subtle noise and some chromatic aberration at the corners to really sell the effect of a real camera. And after all of that is done, this is what the final animation looks like. So that was the whole thing. It's pretty short, but I'm really proud of it. I almost quit this project because I had lost all motivation in the middle of it, but I'm really glad that I still pushed through. The thing with motivation is that we often think that it's a prerequisite to starting something, but motivation can also come after we start working on something. Alright, now before I get too philosophical, I just want to thank you guys for watching this video till the end. It really means a lot to me and I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something new today. I've had been putting off making this video since 2 months now and it's already 2022. Guess I can say I've been procrastinating for a year. Anyway, I wanted to mention that I might be posting this animation as an NFT because I've been wanting to get into it for various reasons. Money. So if I ever decide to do it, I'll be posting an update on my Instagram and Twitter pages, so make sure you follow me there if you're interested. Also, do check out our Discord server. It's been quite inactive lately, so let's get it alive and running again, shall we? Now that's all there was in this video. I wish you guys a happy new year and hope you're one step closer to your dreams and ambitions in 2022. Thanks for watching and I'll see you guys in the next video.